Imagine being alone, in the silence of the night, when suddenly, your 6-year-old daughter turns to you with wide eyes and whispers, "Mommy, there's a monster in the closet, watching me." You try to comfort her, but then, a chilling detail stops you in your tracks. You see the eyes too. Now, you must decide, is it just an illusion? Or is there something more sinister lurking, something that threatens your family in a way you never imagined? Each night, the fear grows. And as the doors of the past open, you find yourself in a battle against something that should never have returned. If you've ever imagined yourself in this mother's shoes, fighting to protect your daughter from something that defies logic, then this story is for you. If you liked this story, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes, like it, and leave a comment sharing what you think. I'd love to hear your opinion on what happens next. It was a quiet night, one of those where silence seems to stretch throughout the house, broken only by the soft sound of the wind tapping on the windows. I was moving slowly through the room, organizing the last things before finally allowing myself to rest. It was another ordinary day, one of those you go through on autopilot: school, duties, the home routine. The classroom had been chaotic, as always, with 20 little curious faces all vying for my attention. I love teaching, but I must admit, the job can be exhausting. Sometimes I feel drained, but just looking at Emily gives me renewed strength. She was already asleep, or at least I thought she was. I made sure to tell our favorite story before putting her to bed. Once upon a time, there was a little star that shone brighter than all the others. The familiar beginning always brought a smile to her face. I knew those stories calmed her, they were part of our bedtime ritual. So, after kissing her forehead and tucking the blanket up to her chin, I walked away, certain that my daughter would finally have a peaceful night's sleep. However, as I was preparing to lie down, I felt that subtle unease, the kind of feeling only mothers understand, as if something in the air was out of place. My mind started to wander, thinking of everything and nothing at the same time. It had been a long day, filled with small setbacks that lingered until the evening. Deep down, I knew I was delaying the inevitable, the moment when the silence becomes too big, and the thoughts, too noisy. During the day, it's easy to get distracted by life, by tasks. But at night, when the house goes quiet, thoughts have a way of coming to life. I was trying to relax, maybe even pick up my phone for a last look at social media, when I heard Emily's soft voice break the silence. "Mommy?" It was a sound I had heard many times before. At first, I thought it was one of her usual requests: another glass of water, one last story, or even a request to sleep in my room. I sighed lightly, feeling the fatigue weigh a bit more on me, but at the same time, prepared myself to meet her need. It was normal, after all, kids have these phases, and Emily, with her vivid imagination, has always been more sensitive to noises or shadows at night. I walked to her room, opening the door slowly so as not to startle her. The soft light from the star-shaped nightlight cast delicate shadows on the walls. Emily was sitting on the bed, her big brown eyes fixed on the wardrobe. She seemed completely awake, clutching the edge of the blanket so tightly that her knuckles were white. There was something in her expression that made me pause for a moment. This wasn't a usual request. There was something different. "What is it, sweetie? Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice as calm and gentle as possible. I didn't want to scare her further, whatever was going on. Emily looked up at me, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "There's a monster in the wardrobe," she said, her voice slightly trembling. It caught me off guard. She had gone through that phase of fearing monsters a few months back, but lately, things seemed to have calmed down. "It's watching me," That last sentence was said with a frightening certainty, as if she was truly seeing something I couldn't. My first reaction was to smile, thinking it was just her imagination. We had been through this before. Maybe she had watched something on TV that unsettled her, or she was just too tired. "Honey, you know monsters don't exist," I began to say, moving closer to the bed. But as I spoke, she didn't take her eyes off the wardrobe for even a second. That made me uncomfortable. I looked toward the closet, and for a moment, I almost felt the same as she did, a presence. But I knew it was impossible. There was logic in my adult world. Wardrobes are just furniture, nothing more. Even so, I crouched beside her, holding her hand. "How about if Mommy checks, just to make sure there's nothing there?" Emily nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the wardrobe. I stood up, and in that brief second before opening the wardrobe door, I felt a wave of uncertainty. I couldn't say where that feeling was coming from. Maybe it was the exhaustion or the way Emily was staring at the closet, but when my fingers touched the handle, my heart sped up a little. Ridiculous, I thought. It's just a closet. I opened the door slowly, expecting to see piled clothes, the toys Emily insisted on hiding in there. But before I could even process what I was seeing, fear crawled up my spine. In the darkness among the hanging clothes, something gleamed. It wasn't the reflection of the room lights. It was different. My whole body froze. I saw an eye. My lungs seemed to shrink, and for a moment, panic completely paralyzed me. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't my imagination. It was real. Someone was in there, watching us. The urge to protect my daughter pushed me into action. I slammed the wardrobe door shut, my mind spinning in thousands of directions. What had I just seen? My heart was racing, and now, the fear wasn't just hers, it was mine too. My fingers trembled as I tried to hold my phone and type the number for the police. It was a tremendous effort to stay calm, but each word felt as heavy as a ton. What I had just seen, that presence in the wardrobe, wouldn't leave my mind. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, no matter how much I wanted to believe I might be mistaken, something inside me screamed that it was real. Too real. 911, what is your emergency? The calm voice of the dispatcher on the other end should have reassured me, but instead, my panic seemed to grow, each word dragging itself out of my throat. There's someone in my house. The phrase came out faster than I intended, and I almost choked on my fear. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. In my daughter's wardrobe. I saw an eye, I saw someone in there. The word sounded strange, even to me. It seemed so absurd, so unlikely, but I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't a reflection, nor an illusion. It was someone. The dispatcher remained calm, something I was struggling to do. "Ma'am, a patrol is on its way. Stay on the line and remain calm. We're on our way. Keep the bedroom door closed and stay in a safe place with your daughter." As I listened to the instructions, my heart was still racing, pounding in my ears. I couldn't take my eyes off the wardrobe. Now closed, but somehow looking much more menacing than a simple piece of furniture should. Emily was beside me, clutching my hand so tightly her small fingers seemed to merge with mine. I tried to breathe deeply and show her some confidence, but I wasn't sure who was more terrified, her or me. "Mommy, the monster," her voice was low, almost a whisper, and her eyes, big and frightened, looked directly at me for protection. I looked at her, trying to smile, trying to convey any feeling of security, but the truth was my mind was a mess. I felt vulnerable and helpless, and that's not how a mother is supposed to feel, not when her instinct is to protect. I knelt beside Emily and wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. She nestled into my chest, and I stroked her soft hair, feeling her quick breaths against me. "It's okay, honey. It's going to be all right, asterisk asterisk," I whispered, though those words were as much for myself as they were for her. Everything around me seemed amplified, every creak in the house, every groan of the floorboards, sounds I'd normally ignore now felt alarming. Everything seemed like a threat. It was as if the house was alive, conspiring against me. I knew I shouldn't, but every few seconds, my eyes drifted back to the wardrobe. Why was everything so quiet now? My mind couldn't stop imagining what or who could be inside, hidden among Emily's clothes, waiting. "Will it take long, Mommy?" Emily's question was a sudden reminder that I needed to keep her calm, that now wasn't the time to let fear take over. She looked up at me with those big, frightened eyes, and I knew it was my responsibility to keep her safe, even if I was panicking. I took a deep breath and brushed away the tears welling up in my eyes. "They're coming, sweetheart. They're on their way. It won't take long." But, internally, I could hardly wait for the police to arrive. Every minute felt like an eternity, and I knew that if someone was truly inside, the danger was just a few meters away from us. The sound of silence was deafening, the echo of my own breathing and Emily's silent crying filled the room. Everything around me felt oppressive. I could hear the soft sound of the wind outside, but in here, the air felt dense, heavy, as if each breath was a monumental effort. I no longer knew what to expect. What if whatever was inside decided to come out? I stood up slowly, keeping Emily close to me. I needed to be ready, I needed to protect my daughter if anything happened before the police arrived. My body was on high alert. Every cell in me seemed to scream for action, yet at the same time, I knew I couldn't face this alone. I couldn't open that wardrobe again. The mere thought made me tremble. I looked at my phone and, still on the line with the dispatcher, I asked, "How much longer until the officers get here?" My voice came out shaky, and I hated hearing myself sound so vulnerable. "Soon, ma'am. Stay calm." The reassuring tone of the dispatcher didn't seem to match the urgency I felt. I was trying hard to stay calm. But how could I be calm when my daughter's safety was at stake? How could I act as if everything was fine, when I had no idea what was watching us from behind that door? What terrified me most was the uncertainty. I didn't know what was inside, nor what it wanted. I didn't know if I should act or wait. My maternal instincts screamed at me to do something, to get my daughter out of there, but the police's instructions were clear: stay put, wait for the patrol. I was trapped. With each passing minute, my desperation grew. I forced myself to hold Emily close, but my mind kept drifting back to the wardrobe, to that single eye I had seen. It was impossible to forget. Whatever it was watching us. Finally, I heard a sound that almost brought me to tears of relief: sirens in the distance, getting closer. I knew the police were near. But at the same time, a new wave of panic washed over me. What if whatever was in the wardrobe tried something before they arrived? I held Emily even closer, feeling her small body tremble against mine. "It's going to be okay," I whispered again, more to myself than to her. The sirens were getting closer. And I prayed that the police would arrive in time. When the siren finally stopped in front of my house, my chest relaxed momentarily. The police were here. Finally, I moved away from the bedroom door, still holding Emily's hand tightly, and watched the officers jump out of their cars with agility, heading straight for the entrance. They seemed calm, efficient, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it might already be too late. Whatever was there, I knew it was waiting, hidden, somewhere inside that house. "Ma'am, what happened?" The first officer to speak was young, with a serious face but eyes that tried to convey some reassurance. He seemed to analyze the situation logically, as if it were just another call. But it wasn't. This wasn't just anything, I felt the urgency in my chest, as if every second was crucial. With each passing minute, the feeling that something was wrong only grew stronger. "There's something inside the wardrobe. I saw an eye." My voice came out with a firmness I didn't know I possessed, but as soon as I realized it, I was almost begging them to understand. I knew what I had seen. It wasn't an illusion. It was real. The officers exchanged glances, and frustration began to set in. One of them, a middle-aged man with the look of someone who had faced all sorts of situations, looked at Emily's wardrobe and frowned. "There are no signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone has been here." He spoke in a monotonous tone, as if trying to calm me down, but it only heightened the sense of helplessness I was feeling. "Nothing. They found nothing, **. Anger surged suddenly, mixed with a sense of despair. How could they find nothing? How could they dismiss what I had seen, what was so clearly in front of them? That I was real. Maybe it was just a shadow in the wardrobe. That's common, especially with children around. The older officer told me this in a calm voice, but his words carried the weight of a medical diagnosis, as if they were trying to convince me that this was all just a nightmare I had created in my mind. But it wasn't just a nightmare. I tried to swallow the anger rising in my throat, but I couldn't help it. I know what I saw. I wanted to scream, to convince everyone there that something was wrong, but the frustration only grew with each second. I didn't know how to explain it, how to convince these people that I wasn't imagining things. The older officer looked at me with a gentle expression, trying to reassure me. "Ma'am, we're doing our job. If we find anything, we'll investigate. For now, there's no reason to panic." But those words didn't bring me peace. Nothing felt calm anymore. The officers continued their search through the house, checking every corner, which only increased my despair. They searched Emily's room, the wardrobe, even the guest rooms and the kitchen. And nothing. Nothing, no clue. No explanation. I didn't know what to do anymore. How could I explain what I'd seen? How could I make them believe me when they couldn't see what I saw, ***. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the officers began to leave, their expressions impassive. "I think that's all, ma'am. If you need anything else, we're available." The younger one said this with slight hesitation, maybe sensing the frustration I was feeling. I just nodded, unable to find any more words. What else could I say? Nothing, because no one believed me. As soon as the door closed behind them, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Emily was quiet, lying on the bed, her eyes still wide, still full of fear. I felt that nothing had changed. Nothing had been resolved, ***. The silence in the house was heavy, and the fear was still there, lingering in the air. "Mom." Emily's soft voice interrupted my thoughts. She looked at me with that sweet, vulnerable gaze. I smiled at her, trying to push my frustration aside, but my mind was cloudy. I didn't know how to calm her down when I was on the verge of losing control myself. "It's okay, honey. It's okay, Asterisk asterisk I said, more to myself than to her. Then there was a knock at the door. David, my neighbor and longtime friend, was there with a concerned look on his face. He had heard the commotion with the police, and seeing that nothing had been resolved, he sensed that I was alone in this situation. I heard the commotion. Is everything okay? He asked, looking at me with genuine concern. I shook my head, still trembling, and the sense of despair took over me. I don't know. I saw something. But no one believes me. My voice faltered at the end of the sentence, and I realized how vulnerable I felt. David looked at me with an understanding expression, but also with surprise. I knew he didn't fully understand what was happening, but at least he wasn't judging me. I believe you. His words, soft and firm, were an unexpected relief. As if, for a brief moment, he had erased the loneliness and frustration I was feeling. And I'll help you. I'll investigate. We'll figure out what's happening. Those words were like a balm for my soul. Thank you. I whispered, almost in a sigh. Knowing that someone was on my side, that at least he believed me, gave me a bit of strength to carry on. Even if the investigation had turned up nothing so far, perhaps, with David's help, something could finally be explained. And, for a brief moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. The following nights dragged on like torture. I had tried everything. I locked every window with excessive caution, checked every door, every corner of the house more than once before going to bed. But no matter how prepared I was, the fear never seemed to go away. Every creak of the house, every distant noise in the silence of the night made me jump out of bed. The shadow, as Emily began to call it, was there. It was always there, in the darkness, waiting. The first night Emily woke up crying, my heart sank. Mom, she's back. She's there, in the wardrobe. The sound of her trembling voice tore me apart. How could someone so small live with this kind of fear? She genuinely seemed to see something, and it broke my heart in a way I didn't know how to handle. I forced myself to go to the wardrobe once again, pulling the doors open with trembling hands. Nothing, there was nothing. Nothing but those hanging clothes and a musty smell. But even so, something inside me told me I wasn't crazy. It wasn't just a child's fear. It wasn't just her imagination. I knew what I had seen. When I returned to the room, Emily was clinging to my bed, her eyes full of tears. She's going to get me, Mom. And, for some inexplicable reason, I knew she believed it deeply, from the bottom of her heart. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the silent house. The sound of the wind, the creak of wood, but nothing more. And yet, a cold sensation hung in the air, something invisible that I couldn't shake. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and tension. Missing work, trying to convince everyone that the fear was there, but no one seemed to believe me. There didn't seem to be anyone who understood what was happening, not even David, who, although he was my friend and willing to help, didn't know exactly how to handle it. I felt alone. It was on one of those mornings that he showed up, with his serious expression of concern, after yet another night without rest. He found me sitting on the couch, a cup of cold coffee in my hand, my gaze lost. "You need to rest, Sarah," he said, interrupting my thoughts before I could say anything. "This has gone too far. It's hurting you. You're exhausted." I could hear the concern in his voice, but he didn't know what it was like to be trapped in this. What it was like to live with this weight on my shoulders, knowing something was wrong, but no one could see or believe it. "I can't rest. Not while she's there," while the shadow is there. I know what I saw, David. I can't rest. My voice came out broken, but I couldn't control myself. I couldn't pretend everything was okay, there was no way. He took a deep breath, seeming to weigh his words before speaking. I'll come by every night, check the house. I'll make sure everything is okay. But you need to trust that it's going to be alright. You need to try to rest. I wanted to believe him. I truly wanted to rest. But inside, there was something tight, a feeling that at any moment, things could get worse. I knew something was wrong, something far beyond a simple rational explanation. David's words were comforting in a strange way. I knew he was trying to calm me down, to bring some relief. But, at the same time, something inside me, a deep and unsettling feeling, told me it wouldn't be that simple. The shadow was waiting. I could feel it, asterisk asterisk. I forced myself to put on a mask of normalcy. I tried to smile at Emily the next morning, tried to convince her that nothing was happening, that she was safe. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Not while that gaze, remained hidden in the shadows of the wardrobe. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I didn't know what else to do. I was at a breaking point. Every night felt like a lost battle, with the feeling that the shadow was drawing closer and closer, wrapped in the darkness of the wardrobe. Emily could no longer sleep, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't close my eyes for more than a few minutes without feeling the cold fear tightening in my chest. Something was happening. Something we couldn't understand, but it felt real, a presence that had been waiting for a long time. In this desperate situation, my mind started drifting back to the past. In the middle of the night, when everything was quiet, I went down to the attic where I kept old boxes of memories, things from my childhood, yellowed photos, and diaries I had never read again. I needed to understand what was happening. Something told me the answer lay there, in the past. Maybe I had missed a detail, or maybe it was time to confront something I had buried myself. Flipping through the yellowed pages of my diary, I found old notes, some that I had completely forgotten. The words from a distant time started flooding over me, and as I scanned those pages, something began to take shape in my mind, like a puzzle I hadn't completed in years. And then, between pages written in the small, desperate handwriting of a child, I saw the photo. A photo of a boy, smiling, with messy hair and big, curious eyes. It was a picture of Lucas, my childhood best friend. The one I hadn't seen in over 15 years. He had disappeared when we were only 10, and I remembered the pain of that day, the emptiness. The police found nothing. No clues, no sign. He simply vanished. In the photo, he looked so alive, so present, but what shocked me wasn't just the image. As I looked at the photo, something began to stir in my memory. A conversation. I remembered a conversation we had had shortly before he disappeared, a kind of childhood confession about things we couldn't explain, about fears that seemed bigger than we could understand. "Sarah, there's something there, in the shadow of my room. I see an eye. Something is watching me. I don't know what it is, but it's bad." His words echoed in my mind like a distant scream. I had never given much thought to it, assuming it was just a childish fear, something all kids went through. He spoke about the shadow as if it were a real presence, something that watched him every time the light went out. He called it the shadow, but I never imagined it could be real. A chill ran down my spine as a wave of shock coursed through my body. Lucas's words now overlapped with Emily's situation. She spoke of the same thing. The same shadow. The same eye. The same feeling of being watched. Could this be connected? Could what happened to Lucas be returning now, for my daughter? I stood there, motionless, staring at the photo, trying to process the revelation, trying to understand what was happening. But the truth was starting to form before me, a truth I wasn't ready to accept. The shadow haunting Emily, causing me sleepless nights, which seemed to be gaining strength, wasn't just a child's imagination. It wasn't a nightmare. It was something more. Something that, as much as I wanted to deny it, was connected to Lucas's disappearance. My heart raced with the revelation. Could the shadow have taken Lucas, and now, was it coming for my daughter? It was as if Lucas's words, which I had dismissed as mere childhood fears, were now repeating in my daughter. What happened to him, was now happening to Emily. For the first time, I felt truly powerless in the face of this. I didn't know how to stop this. The pain and fear mixed within me, and I no longer knew what to do. I needed to protect Emily, but how could I do that when even I didn't know what we were facing? Was I dealing with something supernatural? Something beyond any logic? But the most frightening thing of all was that, the more I tried to understand, the more I found myself tangled in a nightmare that seemed to have no end. I was losing control. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my mind a complete mess, and the words I had just uncovered still hammered in my head like a distant echo, repeating endlessly. The photo of Lucas, the conversation, everything seemed to fit together in a torturous puzzle I didn't know how to complete. I didn't know what to do, but something inside me told me that the only person who could help me handle this right now was David. I sought him out soon after making that discovery. He was my neighbor, but he was more than that by now. David had been a constant presence in my life since Lucas disappeared, and somehow, he was the only one I could rely on in moments of crisis. When I found him in the garage, I knew he would sense the gravity of the situation. He knew how much I was struggling with the idea of losing my sanity. He knew that, even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure of anything, but still, I needed to be heard. David looked into my eyes with a serious expression. That seriousness was rare in someone usually so playful, but he knew that when I was like this, something was wrong. He didn't interrupt me as I explained everything, the shadow, the eyes in the wardrobe, the photo of Lucas, the connection I couldn't explain. "Sarah, this sounds hard to believe," he said gravely. I saw the doubt in his eyes, but he hesitated before continuing. "But I don't think you're imagining things." He sighed, as if trying to process everything I had just told him. "I don't know what this means, but, if you're right, and this is really happening again, then we need to do something. We'll stay prepared." He didn't hesitate, didn't doubt. The only thing he did was adjust his shirt and prepare to act. When he talked about standing guard outside the house, the idea gave me a bit of relief. I knew that, at least for that night, I wouldn't be facing the unknown alone. David would be there, keeping watch, he'd be alert, looking for any sign that something was out of place. "I'll stay out front, in my car. If anything happens, I'll call for backup." He paused, looking at me with the intense gaze that had always comforted me. "I'm here, Sarah. No matter what happens." I didn't know if he believed everything I was saying, but the fact that he was willing to do this for me was more than I could have hoped for. In that moment, he gave me the kind of confidence I was desperately trying to find. The fear that had consumed me for the past few days didn't seem as strong with him by my side. I was still scared, but there was something comforting in the fact that he was willing to face the unknown with me. He got ready to leave, and before he went, he placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Trust me, it's going to be okay. I'll be here." "You're not alone." I simply nodded. I didn't know what else to say. I wasn't alone anymore, but I still felt like I was standing on the edge of something terrible, something from which I might not be able to return. When he walked away and the door closed behind him, I went to Emily's room, where she was sleeping soundly, seemingly unaware of the turmoil happening in the house. I looked at her, my heart heavy. I wanted all of this to just be a nightmare, something that would pass with the morning light. But I knew it wasn't. It couldn't be. I went back to the living room and sat on the couch, my eyes fixed on the window, waiting for any movement, any sign. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence of the night. The fear, somehow, intensified. I knew something was lurking, I could feel it, an indescribable sensation that ran down my spine. It wasn't paranoia, it wasn't madness. It was real. Something was out there. Something was approaching again. Hours passed, or at least that's how it felt. The phone lay next to me, a reminder that at any moment I might need to call the police again. But I didn't want to. I wanted to understand what was happening before it reached that point. I didn't want to be seen as the paranoid mother, the woman who couldn't handle losing control. But I knew I wasn't wrong. David came back a few hours later, around 2 a.m., with a grave expression. "Nothing unusual so far," he said, but there was something in his eyes. He was worried. I knew he felt what I was feeling, something was wrong, something was there, and we were about to find out what. The storm roared outside. The sound of rain pounding against the windows and the thunder echoing through the house seemed to intensify the heaviness in the air. I was sitting at the edge of Emily's bed, my eyes fixed on her as she slept, unaware of the growing tension filling the room. She looked so peaceful, I wanted that peace to be real, for all of this to be nothing more than an illusion. But my instincts told me otherwise. The feeling I used to get, that something was wrong, something approaching, returned with full force. It was as if the air had thickened, making it hard to breathe. I looked toward the bedroom door, and that's when I felt it. A slight vibration on the floor, a soft sound, as if the very space was being compressed. I didn't move. My body was paralyzed by tension, but my eyes were fixed on the wardrobe, that damn wardrobe. It was beginning to creak. The doors, which had been closed minutes before, were opening slowly, very slowly. I saw a faint glimmer of light, something that shouldn't have been there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, I didn't want to believe it, but it was real. The shadow, the thing I had sensed and feared for days, was now in front of me. It was no longer a vague shape, no longer an eye in the dark or a feeling of being watched. It was a physical presence, a dark figure taking form, twisting in an unnatural way. It was a man, but not in a normal way. He was distorted, twisted, as if time and shadows had molded him into a grotesque shape. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his clothes, if you could call them clothes, were tattered and filthy. His eyes were two dark holes, as if he had been consumed by darkness itself. I couldn't scream immediately. Something held me back, a mix of terror and perplexity, as if the sight of this creature was beyond what any human could comprehend. But then the scream came out. It was like a primal scream, an instinctive, almost animal reaction, emerging from somewhere deep inside me. "What do you want?" I didn't know if I was speaking to him or to fate itself, but the words were out of my control, spilling from my mouth like a beam of light in a dark room. The creature recoiled slightly, but the feeling of danger, of something terrible about to happen, didn't go away. It was still there, advancing, its overwhelming presence making me feel small, powerless. At that moment, I heard David's hurried footsteps as he ran into the room with a flashlight in his hand. He pointed it at the creature, and, for a moment, everything became clearer. The deformed man's face twisted with a malevolent look, as if the light were a threat. He turned to retreat, but he didn't disappear. He was still there, in front of us, more real than any nightmare. "Don't go, you bastard!" I shouted again, once more feeling rage take over me. My voice was filled with desperation but also with courage. I wasn't going to let this thing take my daughter, as it had taken Lucas. David, without hesitation, aimed the flashlight directly at the man, and something happened. The being retreated again, as if the light was some kind of repulsion to him. He seemed confused, as if he didn't know how to react to the force of our presence. I didn't know how to act, but I knew we couldn't yield, couldn't flee. I grabbed David's hand tightly, trying to regain control of the situation. "We need to call them." "Call the police," he said, his voice tense but focused. I knew that if we let the being escape, it would be the end. He wouldn't disappear. He wouldn't go away. He knew what he wanted. And he could no longer stay hidden in the shadows. David took out his phone and called the police, his voice steady but with an undertone of fear he couldn't hide. The figure before us seemed to start disintegrating, contorting even more, his eyes shining with anger. It was the shadow, and it was finally revealing its true form. And, for the first time, I realized, that man was not just a nightmare figure. He was what I feared most of all. He had kidnapped Lucas. He had been responsible for all the evil that had occurred in our town, all the suffering that could never be explained. It wasn't long before I heard the sound of sirens. The police were arriving. I was exhausted, in shock, but I knew that this time, things would be different. They had arrived. I wasn't alone. The shadow would be truly confronted. The officers burst into the room in a tense moment, their weapons ready. They didn't hesitate. And when the being saw the flashlights, it seemed like he was finally losing his form, as if the light was his only weakness. With one last furious look, the shadow faded into the shadows, but not before leaving a sense of emptiness and loss, as if it was still present, lurking. The police conducted a search, and finally, answers began to surface. The man who had abducted my friend years ago wasn't merely among us in physical form. He had been consumed by darkness, by his own creation of evil. But the truth was clear, he had come back for us. And he would never leave. But at that moment, when the officers restrained the man who, it seemed, was somehow still alive, I knew that, at least for now, my daughter was safe. I knew that we had won. But what I didn't know was whether the real battle was truly over. When the police finally arrested that man, I felt an immense weight lift off my shoulders, as if the threat that had haunted us for so long had finally been neutralized. But despite the arrest, the fear was still there, latent. It hadn't gone away. No matter how much I wanted to believe the nightmare was over, there was something inside me that knew, the feeling of danger, that something could return, would never completely disappear. When the sound of the sirens faded, when the last officer stepped out the door and the house returned to a silence that, in some way, suffocated us, I looked at Emily. She was sitting on my bed, her eyes still wide, her arms wrapped around her knees, as if trying to protect herself from what she had already witnessed. She had seen too much for her age. Emily looked up at me, with a slight sigh of relief, but there was still fear in her face. She looked at me with that childlike expression, which, even after the panic had passed, still couldn't shake the feeling of being in danger. "Are we safe now, Mommy?" Her voice was soft, almost as if she was afraid to hear the answer. I hugged her tightly, feeling her head rest against my chest, the warmth of her body bringing a bit of comfort to my soul. It was hard to imagine that something so dark and twisted had touched our lives in such a brutal way. But now, with the man in custody, I could finally give her a clear answer. "Yes, darling. We are safe," I said, and as I said it, I tried to believe it, even though a part of me knew that answer didn't mean the fear had completely disappeared. But it doesn't matter, what matters is that, as long as I had strength, my daughter would have protection. As long as I was standing, no one else could destroy what we had. Now that the storm had passed and the man was behind bars, I finally found a bit of peace. But I also knew there was more to learn from all of this. Fear never disappears completely. Even with the comfort of knowing we were safe for now, I knew it would always be a constant presence, a shadow on the edge of my mind. But as I looked at Emily, as I saw her clinging to me, I understood that fear doesn't have the power to define who we are, if we know how to face it. I was no longer sure of anything, but there was something within me that was now unbreakable. We weren't captives of the shadows, whether they were real or imagined. We were stronger than that. Even when darkness seemed to engulf us, there was an inner light that could not be extinguished, even by the deepest horrors. And that's what this experience taught me: we are not victims of fear, we can choose what to do with it. We can allow ourselves to feel terror, yes, but we can also react. We can protect, fight, survive. Even when everything seems lost, there is strength within us, there always will be. No matter how dark and full of invisible threats the world around us may be, we will never lose the ability to create a refuge of safety and love. There will always be courage, there will always be light, and there will always be a way forward. When Emily and I lay down that night, in the silence that now dominated the house, I knew that the shadows no longer had power over us. They could try, but now, we were immune.